It's been officially 8 months since we started our Beach House Airbnb down in Florida, and it has been a really interesting 8 months. Not gonna lie, it was kind of a steep learning curve for a completely out-of-state project. We are now in a recession, interest rates have climbed to an all-time high, and right after we went live on our listing, Airbnb put out their summer update, which changed the algorithm a little bit, and then later in the year there was the winter update. Hurricane Ian brought a lot of bad weather to Florida in September and kind of affected our listing and the performance of the whole market. And the local supply doubled since 2 years ago. And we hosted our first Karen. So a lot has happened, and I wanted to hop on and just give you an update of the 10 things that I learned from this experience thus far. The first thing I learned is that assembling the right team is such an important thing. And I feel like it's kind of a cliche thing. Everyone says, oh, make sure you have the right team, the boots on the ground. But I feel like these past 8 months, I truly understood what it meant. So we have our cleaning professionals, our few handyman contacts, and then we have a local assistant that kind of is a catch-all person, a lawn person, and a pest control company. And between all of that, you try to operate like a business and cut costs where you can. So initially we went for a cheaper lawn service company, and that turned out to be such a hassle and so unreliable. Like, we would have to remind the lawn person to come by. Our neighbors would tell us, hey, your grasses are kind of going out of control. And then this lawn person would tell us to go buy from Amazon, like the weed and feed for the grasses. And then we would have to deal with, when does this weed and feed get delivered? Because we don't want a big box when the guests are here. So we were trying to time it between check-in and check-out. Like, all of that was such a hassle and so unnecessary. And in the end, it didn't really end up saving that much money. And so we finally made the switch to a slightly more expensive person. And man, the difference was night and day. Like, just the mental space it cleared up was so worth it. And the main thing I think I learned here is that what I need to do is be a really, really good host. And whatever I can outsource, I should try to find someone who can take that completely off my plate. Not someone that I have to micromanage and nonstop communicate with. Of course, you communicate with your team, but there has to be a level of autonomy and trust, and someone who can function on their own and has good common sense and is dependable is totally worth the money, so that I can free up mental space and time to do what I'm good at, which is to keep improving the space and coming up with new ways to reach more guests, making the experience better as a host. That's my job. The second thing I learned is to make an operational handbook, like a house manual, but for yourself. And this would include stuff like when you need to change the HVAC filters and what size those filters are, and your gas tank rental info, whatever list of maintenance items for like the utilities and the structural components of the house are, making a list of that and building in checkpoints and times for you to review those. And I feel like I have to tell you how I came to this realization, and this is super embarrassing, but we got a call from our cleaners one day and they said, hey, there's water dripping from the ceiling, which like was a terrible thing to hear. And like, from afar, what am I supposed to do? So I start kind of frantically calling around. When the ceiling is leaking, it's kind of hard to know where it's coming from. And so the roof, which is the worst thing, was the first thing I went to. And luckily I was able to find somebody that day. But when they came out, they're like, hey, it's not your roof, buddy. You have a second air conditioner in your attic and it needs a filter changed. And I was like, oh my God, what am I doing with my life? I didn't know. Well, I knew, I guess. I knew at one point because I read the inspection report, but then I guess I forgot that there was a second AC unit in the attic. And therefore, there was not like a system of every few months go change this filter built into my calendar. And so I think the lesson here is to really sit down and kind of make an operations manual, like for the house itself, of all the things you need to do around a house, which is so boring and it's not my favorite thing to do, but I am working on it, and hopefully when I'm done, I'll share it with you guys if that would be helpful. Actually, I can really use your help here. If you think that would be also useful for you, let me know in the comments so that I get just a little bit more motivation to finish that so that I can share it with you. I think that would be the push that I need to stop procrastinating on this project. And then the third thing I wanted to share is that most Airbnb guests are amazing people, and honestly, it reminds me why why I wanted to do this in the first place. So just sharing a couple stories specific to this Florida house. One guy booked it and he gave me a call and he was like, hey, do you have an iron? And I said, well, I don't yet, but I was going to get it anyway, so why don't you go get it and just bill me? And he was like, okay, yes, I'll do that. I'm trying to iron the shirt so that I can get ready so that I can propose to my girlfriend, which is why I booked your house. And I was just like, oh my God, don't worry about it. Let's go. Let's get your shirt figured out. And they were such a lovely family. I think they had a good time. And they now have like this special memory of this house and they want to come back every year. Another story I wanted to share is a little on the sadder side, but I think is such a cool story. One family booked our house to mainly say goodbye to their dad. He had an end-stage illness and was kind of nearing the end of his life. And rather than, sitting in a hospital, the family thought, why don't we just get everyone to fly into the same spot by the beach and just enjoy our last week together as a family. And it's like heartbreaking because you can see them from the Ring camera and they're all really sad. And this is the kind of stuff that sets an Airbnb apart from a hotel, right? And don't get me wrong, I love a good hotel experience and not knocking on hotels at all, but I feel like this is the kind of thing that you can't do at a hotel. And this is the whole point of this experience. And I mean, yeah, part of why we have a vacation rental is for the money, for the business side of things. But as a host, it's these stories, it's this side of the whole hosting gig that brings me joy. And the way these stories make me feel connected to guests as people and to experience what they're going through, even if I happen to get another house and another house in the future and like expand my portfolio, I don't want to lose this feeling because this is such a special thing and I am just so honored that our house and our little effort in setting up a vacation rental could be contributing to someone's experience and be part of their memories forever. Now, in the beginning of the video, I know I did mention we did host one obnoxious guest who left a bad review and complained about things that didn't exist, but that is just part of the deal. And luckily we are buffered by many 5-star reviews from wonderful people. And I have many stories that I carry with me that kind of just lift me up and keep me going. The moral of the story here is there are always going to be nasty people, but remember the good and focus on what you can do and don't let those bad people bring you down. The fourth thing that I learned from this experience is to really be ready to stomach seasonality. Like I knew going in that the summer season and spring break, that would be the peaks, and then there are kind of dips and troughs in between. I knew that, but I think seeing it in real life, seeing like a 5-figure swing in monthly profit, that is not for the faint of heart. And I also feel like maybe I went into it with a slightly overinflated ego after my experience with this tiny house, because as it turns out, unless you are literally the top of the market, like #1 in the whole area, you are subject to seasonality. I think if anything, my tiny house experience was a little bit of an anomaly and I needed to be brought down to earth and really be humble and prepare myself appropriately for the beach house. The shock, I guess, of this seasonal swing in revenue kind of drove me to some hasty decisions that I later regretted. So for example, I was like really worried about not getting a booking for like a week. And then I was like frantically setting up listings on booking.com and Furnished Finder and everywhere. And Furnished Finder, that doesn't even make sense. Like I'm not shooting for midterm rentals. This is like a 5-bedroom beach house. That doesn't even make sense. So there I just like sunk $99 for no reason. And then for booking.com, the terms and conditions, the cancellation policies, the damage protection, everything on that whole layout is just so different, and I was really rushing it and not taking time to read all the fine print. Yes, we ended up getting a couple bookings from booking.com, but I still feel like I left money on the table by not really optimizing the length of stay minimum over there, because unfortunately booking.com doesn't sync with Price Labs. And then also I didn't read the commission stuff properly, so unlike Airbnb and Vrbo, where the host fees are just taken out of your payout, booking.com sends you the whole payout and then you have to like pay them via an invoice later for your commission, which is super confusing. Plus, I now have to do extra tax reporting because Airbnb and Vrbo takes care of it automatically for Florida, but Booking.com does not. And so literally, I would have saved a lot of hassle for myself and probably not lost out on any bookings had I just taken a deep breath and been more mentally prepared for those swings. And then number 5 is to get really good pictures. And I don't mean just any kind of professional photos, which we did pay for. They're not living up to what I want. And the guests in their comments say that to me too. They're like, wow, this house is so much better in person, which I guess is cool that they had a good experience. But that also means my photos just aren't good enough to capture what this house is able to offer. I have a few specific thoughts on how I'd like to update the design a little bit and how I'd like to retake some of the photos. So stay tuned for a future video. I'll be heading to our beach house in another couple months and I will be sure to bring you along. Moving on to number 6, I think I got to fine tune my skills on dynamic pricing and reading market data. This Florida beach house is located in a very heavily weekend type of market. And so if I only had 2-night minimums and people book Friday and Saturday every weekend, even then I would just have 2 out of 7 days, which makes my occupancy basically like 30%, which is not good at all. It took a little bit of analyzing and thinking to kind of strategize how I would set up my minimum night stays, how far out and for what season. I think I've got it fine-tuned now, but that did take a little bit of a learning curve in the beginning. And then number 7 is to automate everything that you can. You're probably plenty busy, I'm busy. There's so much to learn about growing a vacation rental business. If there are any repetitive tasks that you're wasting time on, that is taking time away from what you can be doing, thinking about your business and doing better on aspects that only you can do. I will be doing a video on my favorite apps to help automate stuff, so stay tuned for that. I know I say this for everything, that I will make a video, but I promise it'll get done. It's coming. It's on my to-do list. And then number 8 is kind of a small thing, but I didn't realize that people do pay for early check-in and late checkouts. We kept getting requests for this, and then every time I would have like a non-canned response and be like, well, this date is open anyway, so it's probably fine. Or like some other times I'm like, they weren't very nice to me on their initial message. No, just standardize it. Include it in the check-in instructions or whatever makes sense for your listing. We started including this in the check-in message because usually by then we would know, all right, how likely is this place going to be booked up the day before this person checks in? And we just include in there, hey, if you'd like to check in at 11 a.m. for $80 extra, please let us know and we'd be happy to block off the night before for you. Something like that. And then we also offer late checkout when we send the checkout instruction message to our guests. And so far, knock on wood, right there. So far, no one's been annoyed that we even mentioned this. If they don't want it, they just don't say anything. And if they do want it, usually they're more than happy to pay that amount of money to stay extra so that they don't have to wake up early, for example, with their kids. Anyway, I just wished I would have jumped on board sooner with this early check-in, late checkout situation. And then number 9 is more of a reflection of, is this still a profitable thing? I keep seeing the hashtag Airbnb bust everywhere. And so I thought I would share my own experience in terms of the profitability this year as well. I will say it's probably not as profitable as it would have been in 2021, but that was more of an anomaly with everyone coming out of lockdown and wanting to travel, but then limited within the US, plus inflation. That was a very specific scenario. We are currently still on track to meet our projected revenue. Certainly it's looking more like the average case scenario, not the worst case, but also not like going to the moon and like swimming in cash, but we're happy with it. And so I'm not too worried about the whole Airbnb bust thing. Our profit is looking like roughly $7,000. And this includes paying for the expense of us traveling there to update the house, but also to enjoy the beach. And so I feel like that's not too shabby. It's roughly within what we projected. Obviously this year it was a steep learning curve and we spent a lot of time on this project. So on a per hour basis, you could argue $7,000 isn't all that much. But hey, some of the things that I learned this year will carry over to next year and hopefully things will get smoother on the operation side and the time commitment from me would also become less and less. And then lastly, the number 10 thing is more of a confirmation of something I hoped would be true, but I can now conclude that this is indeed a fantastic way to have a vacation house that you get to go visit and feel like you're at home, because literally it is your home, and have some of those expenses be supported through a vacation rental business. And we are really looking forward to going there again as a family, this time with my husband's side of the family, to enjoy the beach, get out of this winter weather up here. For me personally, that was the original dream, and I'm just so happy to see that even though it's a lot of work, especially up front, that is still a viable dream. And I'm just so thankful that we have this opportunity and that so far it's been panning out as we had hoped. That's all I have for this week. I hope you found this interesting and or helpful, and if so, I would really appreciate a thumbs up, and thanks for subscribing, and I will see you again next week. Bye!